On today's show, we'll be joined by weekly co-host Ben DuBose as Kevin Porter Jr. receives a 4-year, $82.5 million extension from the Houston Rockets. We're going to break down the incredibly team-friendly deal with non-guaranteed years laden throughout the entire contract. Only $15.86 million of the 82.5 is currently guaranteed in the very first year of the deal. We're going to break down the framework of the deal, the salary cap implications, what it means for the Rockets organization moving forward, as well as we're going to hear from Kevin Porter Jr. himself and Silas, quite possibly the man who was most touched and happiest about the news of KPJ able to kind of climb the mountain, so to speak, and achieve this milestone in his NBA career. All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. Now, today's question for the show: how do you feel about Kevin Porter Jr.'s contract extension? Let us know in the YouTube comments. I do read each and every one of those every single day. And joining us is our weekly co-host, the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor, Ben DuBose. You can follow on Twitter at Ben DuBose. And Ben, you picked a really good day to kind of, normally we record on Sundays, right, and this was a great situation for us to postpone that recording one day, because now we get to talk about Kevin Porter Jr. and the bombshell news, his contract extension with the Houston Rockets, carrying him 4 more years into the future of this Houston Rockets team. And we're going to kind of get to our reactions to it, KPJ's reaction to the news, Silas, who had a really touching moment, kind of sharing his feelings about what this contract means for KPJ and being a part of his NBA journey. But where I'd like to start with you is just we can go over the kind of contract structure first and foremost, and why this deal is so inherently team friendly, and why it was just an absolute masterclass in GMing by Rafael Stone.
Yeah, the biggest thing is that only the first year is fully guaranteed. The last 3 years all have trigger dates in June, effectively making them team options. So the Rockets have full control, and you understand why they'd be in a strong leverage position based on some of the off-court issues that KPJ had mostly in Cleveland, but also there was the incident at halftime of the New Year's Day game earlier this year in which he left Toyota Center. So it didn't give him a ton of leverage. And so the Rockets really played their strong hand. They got a deal that's just very, very friendly to them, a base of about $15.9 million each year. And rather than it being ascending in terms of giant increases by, the raise structure of the deal, what it sounds like from reading Mark Berman's reporting this afternoon is that each year has that same base, and then there are incentives tied to team performance each year that can potentially get it up to about $20 or so million. And if everything goes right, the best case scenario is 4 years, $82.5 million. That was what was leaked through Wojnarowski when it first broke this morning. But honestly, the way this went down, it's very similar to the Jae'Sean Tate deal in the summer, just a much bigger version of that, in that the initial report was, in this case, 4 years, $82.5 million. In the case of Tate, 3 years, $22.5 million. But then you found later on that there were all of these team options and just essentially this creative deal structure to benefit the Rockets. That didn't come out first. You know why? Because the initial leak comes out through the agent. And so he's going to give the rosiest possible scenario for his client and what he negotiated. And then later it comes out through Houston reporters like Mark Berman what the actual structure is, which of course is very friendly to the Rockets. And really it's just an ideal construction because it gives them complete control in that if something goes wrong, they can exit after any given year or most given years. Now, year 2 and year 3 have the same guarantee date in June of 2024. So you will have to make a decision by then. But I think by that point, 2 years from now, you'll have a pretty good understanding of who Kevin Porter Jr. is as a player and a person and whether it's going to work. But you just have all these options. And yet the Rockets did protect themselves by doing this from the scenario where he has a Jalen Brunson type leap and then potentially plays himself into a way bigger income bracket, which we saw leading to Brunson leading the Mavs altogether this offseason. It's just really good protection. Rafael Stone and the Rockets leveraged basically the hand that they were dealt, which is that, hey, this is a guy who there are these obvious off-court concerns that have really defined a lot of his, at least first 2 years in the NBA. Last year was a lot better. And it just led to a very friendly deal for the Rockets. The last point that I would make on this, there's been a lot of talk. Why would KPJ sign this? My guess is that because of the trust between Kevin Porter Jr. and Rafael Stone, he's willing to take the leap of faith that if he stays on the straight and narrow, that if he goes out there and does his job, the Rockets basically have already given him a wink, wink. Yes, we will pick it up. At least, those year 2 and year 3 options that come up in 2024 that we were discussing earlier. That's something where I do think you can see the Rafael Stone administration being a little different. We've talked about this in the past relative to Daryl Morey. The Rafael Stone administration is much more focused on chemistry and relationships. And I think there's just a certain level of trust that, hey, even though the Rockets need to protect themselves, I think there's enough of a bond between KPJ and the Rockets front office that there's a mutual understanding that if you go out there and take care of what you need to take care of from a personal perspective, then, hey, we are going to pick up that deal, because honestly, it's a good number with the exploding NBA salary cap. Really, a base of $15 million a year is barely more than MLE money. Some fans are just used to the old ways of business. And the reality is it's a pretty team-friendly deal. As far as the percentage of the cap, it's not that big. If anything, the question is on KPJ's end. Why would he accept it? And, there's a lot of reasons you can throw out for that. Number one, we can say it's little, but look, for a guy who hasn't gotten his first big payday, it's a lot to turn down. People have said the same thing about Yordan Alvarez and the Astros. When you haven't gotten that big payday before, even if it's a little bit less than market, well, if you're where you want to be and it's your first big paycheck, yeah, it's going to be tempting to take it. And then secondly, I just think that there's a certain degree of trust between KPJ, his agent, and the Rockets front office that assuming there's no big blow up, assuming nothing happens terribly in some of those off-court concerns that always get brought up, then ultimately it's going to work out favorably for him and that the deal is going to be for much more than just that first fully guaranteed season.
Just to reiterate a couple of the numbers here before we move into our next segment, as we kind of break down all the different angles from what this contract extension means for KPJ, for the organization. We'll hear from KPJ himself reacting to the news of the deal, as he was speaking to media after Rockets practice. Silas had a very touching moment, kind of sharing his thoughts on what the deal meant and, him sharing the journey with Kevin Porter Jr. But, right, so just 4 years, $82.5 million is the original, reported contract structure, $15.86 million guaranteed in year 1. That is all that is currently guaranteed in the deal. The year 2 and year 3 parts of the contract that you alluded to earlier do have a trigger date of June 30th, 2024. So basically right now, the Houston Rockets have 2 more guaranteed years of Kevin Porter Jr. this season and then next season. So they've got 2 years to evaluate KPJ and figure out whether or not he fits alongside Jalen Green well, whether or not he can be the point guard of the future, all these different questions that we've consistently had about KPJ. They've got 2 more years to evaluate that before being forced to decide, okay, do we pick up years 2 and 3 on the new deal? And then the final guarantee date for year 4 of the deal is June 30th, 2025, which would then guarantee for the following season, the team option for the very, very last year in the contract structure. So the Rockets do have a lot of team control. This is an incredibly team-friendly deal. And at this point, this wasn't even something that I thought was in the calculus when it came to all the offseason arguments that we had. Do you extend him? Do you not extend him? The arguments basically revolved around, well, can you get him on an incredibly team-friendly deal like 12, 13 million a year versus guaranteeing him somewhere in the number of 18 or 20 something million a year across 3, maybe 4 years, maybe a team option at the end. This deal is like a blown up version of that Daryl Morey special type contract where you have incredible amount of team control. You have a guaranteed year in that very, very first year of the contract. And then the rest of the contract is non-guaranteed. So it does kind of force Kevin Porter Jr. to stay hungry, to stay on the straight and narrow, like you said earlier, right? To be focused on his development and his growth as a player and have his head screwed squarely onto his shoulders, because if he, deviates from that path, if there are issues, the Rockets have multiple chances actually over the lifetime of this contract to abandon ship if they feel that they need to. But coming up, do want to kind of discuss the different angles from this contract, the different angles that this contract presents, as well as hearing from the man of the hour himself, Kevin Porter Jr. We're going to get there after a quick message from my friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel kind of like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best, most qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. And it is so incredibly easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. And once you have the job post made, all you have to do is add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it incredibly easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, as we kind of continue navigating the Kevin Porter Jr. extension, let's hear from the man himself and KPJ's kind of reaction to what getting this contract ultimately means for him.
It means a lot. It's a milestone in my life that I've reached, and it's more motivation to keep going. A lot of things has happened in my first 3 years being in the league, and my career has been definitely a roller coaster, and this is just a blessing. I'm grateful.
What was it like when you signed the deal? What were your emotions? What was going through you?
Well, I had to go to the weights right after, but it's been mixed emotions, high and just very high, and gratitude, and my frequency level is very high right now. So I just feel grateful and blessed, and the work I put in is starting to show, and more work got to be done.
So KPJ, obviously, a lot of emotions surrounding this deal. This is a guy that, went through a lot to get to this place, in his NBA career. Obviously, a lot of ups and downs, and claimed Houston, saved his life when he spoke at Media Day, when he had his first official Media Day as a Houston Rocket. And those were, really emotionally charged words back when we first heard them. And you can kind of see some of that appreciation, that gratitude, just every time he gets a chance to talk about what it means to have, the fans embrace him, his fellow players embrace him. And it really is gratifying to kind of see the growth and the maturity of KPJ, and kind of how he's really just blossoming and growing up right before our eyes.
Yes, absolutely. Excuse me. Apologies for coughing. I've been a little under the weather the last couple of days, on the road to improvement. As far as KPJ,
we got Ben DuBose and the health and safety protocols. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, I actually missed today's practice and the interviews, which sucks because of the health and safety protocols. I had a fever yesterday, and I did not want to expose any of the Rockets. Last thing I want to do is be responsible for, giving an illness to the Rockets that takes them out of the regular season opener. So unfortunately, I was not at today's practice where those interviews were given for that reason. Am feeling a little bit better. But yeah, come
on, man. You could have shown up. You could have been like the sleeper cell, the tank for Wemby guy, like just, decommission the Rockets for the first 2 weeks of the season just to make sure that, Wemby is still on the table.
Yeah, of course. That would be the ultimate play, the long game of all long games. But look, when we talk about KPJ, and in the first segment, I talked about the trust that I think is sort of an undercurrent to this deal. According to Bobby Marks of ESPN, a lot of agents had asked him, why would KPJ sign this with such a low guarantee? And I think the reason for that is the trust that he has in Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office. And I think that also goes into the positive vibes that you're hearing from Rafael Stone, from Silas at today's practice. I know that went viral today, the clip of Coach Silas responding to Sarge. And that trust is important to, not just getting a friendly deal done that works for both the player and the team. A win-win was how it was put to me, but it's also a big part of their developmental strategy. A lot of the things that they're doing are built around the idea that you can't just throw these guys out there and just magically expect them to develop into the types of players that we all want them to be 2, 3, 4 years from now. It's that they need to be in a positive frame of mind every single day. And we see this, for example, with Eric Gordon. A lot of people this past season wanted him dealt at the deadline. He wasn't, because clearly his teammates love the guy and they feel that his presence, not just on the court but off, is good for the development of the young guys. And that's really sort of the undercurrent of this, of really the entire day, in terms of the quote from Rafael Stone in the press release, the quotes from KPJ and Silas in the interviews at Toyota Center. There's really just this overall vibe of positivity, and I think it feeds into the willingness of him to take that leap of faith on the Rockets and sign the contract. Clearly, he does want to be here, and that's a good sign. But I also think it speaks to the overall way they want to develop these players. They believe, and maybe this is a slight contrast to the past administration, that chemistry is very important, that having these guys in the right frame of mind to get the best version of themselves on and off the court is the way to do that. And it's early on. We're only basically 1 year into the rebuild, at least the KPJ/Jalen era. But so far, so good. There's a lot of positive vibes, and with good reason. And so I'm happy to see KPJ get the reward.
Yeah, we've talked about that specific thing, so many times, the differences between the Daryl Morey era to the Rafael Stone era, and how they interact with players, how they value certain players, and the points of emphasis that they seem to be kind of hammering home as far as valuing the human element of things, valuing the chemistry side of things as far as these players are concerned, not just treating them like assets, right? Not just playing it like it's a 2K game where you're just plugging and playing certain guys, which again, Daryl Morey, as genius of an NBA GM as he is, probably still a top 3 or top 5 GM in the league. I think that was maybe one of his ultimate downfalls, is just he didn't look at it from the human being perspective often enough.
And to that point, there's a feature in The Ringer that Kevin O'Connor wrote today on Daryl. There's actually a segment in which he admits that he probably went a little bit too far in terms of devaluing the chemistry aspect. And so now he's trying to find a happy medium between what he was for a lot of his Houston tenure and, the chemistry focus that a lot of teams have these days. And of course, it's in a section where they also talk to Jeff Van Gundy and Shane Battier, who from early in Morey's tenure were the ultimate in terms of believing in chemistry guys over talent. And like most things, there's a blend and there's risk on the other side of it too. In defense of Daryl, and I guess, you can consider it somewhat of a miss for Rafael Stone. My strong suspicion as to the way things went down with Daniel Tice, everyone asked, why the hell did the Rockets sign Daniel Tice after they already had Christian Wood and then they drafted Alperen Sengun? My strong suspicion, not saying it for sure happened, but my strong suspicion is that they had the deal lined up like most teams do prior to free agency, prior to the draft, which in the shortened off season was only like a week before. And my guess is that Rafael Stone didn't want to bail on the agreement because, again, it's about building that trust. And of course, we talk about it with KPJ in the sense of the players, but also having the agents on board as well. So the agents buy in and will tell the players, hey, I do believe that this GM has your best interest at heart. And ultimately in the Daniel Tice thing, it did end up being a big deal because the Rockets were able to offload him at the deadline without him being seen as a negative asset. But I just think that the word that I go back to that sort of just, to me, is all over this agreement and this unique structure is trust. Really, KPJ is taking a leap of faith that the Rockets have his best interest at heart and that the Rockets are going to ultimately give him much more than that 1 year at $15.9 million, assuming he continues to do what he's done for the better part of the past year. And I think to this point, the Rockets have given him ample reason to believe in them.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think that key word there, trust, is going to be an important part of what the Rockets are trying to grow and continue to establish with Kevin Porter Jr. and so many of the other young guys on this Rockets roster. You can even look at the Jae'Sean Tate deal and argue that trust was a key component of being able to achieve that at such a team-friendly rate compared to what a lot of us thought Jae'Sean Tate would be getting, if he were to hit the open market, next summer, rather than the Rockets, renegotiating that deal and coming up with a very team-friendly contract structure to be able to keep him in-house for, years to come, because they value so much what he brings to the table, the voice that he has, kind of grown in that Rockets locker room. And you can see, again, a lot of similarities between that deal and the Kevin Porter Jr. deal. Coming up, do you want to talk about the probably the best moment from Rockets practice in reacting to what this contract means for the Rockets moving forward? Steven Silas's reaction to this deal. We'll also take a look at some of the future cap implications of this contract. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, there are a lot of people, myself, Ben, you, so many of the Rockets fans, other media members who were, ecstatic to see KPJ receive this contract extension, to be able to see him, continue to grow with this organization. But I don't think anybody was happier for Kevin Porter Jr. than Steven Silas, who was asked about what this deal meant to be kind of a part of this at Rockets media availability right after the extension was announced.
Can you take yourself away from being Coach Silas and just be Steven Silas for a second and think about a young man who was 2 years ago just said that this franchise saved his life? You're part of this franchise. You're part of the reason that he is in the position that he's in right now, and the leadership role that he's in right now. What does that mean to you?
So if you were listening to the pod side of things, Steven Silas was just completely choked up. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the visuals of Silas, and he had to take a little bit to really think about it, looking down, and he teared up. He was, and I've had many opportunities to kind of ask Silas about what his relationship is like with Kevin Porter, as have many others. And that relationship is so special to Steven Silas because, one, he really has a great deal of admiration and love for KPJ, and it's a special relationship because KPJ has really challenged him and helped him grow as a coach, and he's spoken about that dynamic so many times to where this has to be an absolutely kind of just really pivotal moment for him to just be able to see all that hard work, all the blood, sweat, and tears that KPJ has put in to turn his career around and to really cement himself as a pillar, as a piece of this organization moving forward. And for Steven to be even just a small part of that has to be a really, those are the moments that you live for as a coach, to see your player kind of, climb the mountaintop, so to speak.
Yeah. And for starters, it's good to see Steven cry in a positive way. I think when people think about Steven Silas tears, they think back to that post OKC press conference in 2020 or 2021, excuse me. It was the spring of 2021 when they had lost 20 in a row, and that was the game they were supposed to win, and they let it slip, and he was just so despondent, understandably so. And I'm just happy for Steven that he gets to enjoy, it's not a win on the court, but in some ways it's more important than a win on the court, because clearly he's made a difference in Kevin's life and has helped him grow as a person and into much more of a leader than he was 2 years ago, and someone who's much more comfortable in his own skin and is really comfortable coming into his own as a professional, as a person, in a way that he wasn't close to doing when the Rockets traded for him in January 2021. I think it's really nice to see Steven Silas get some flowers, which he's getting from the internet today, because that clip is going viral, understandably so. Great question by Sarge. But Steven's in such a unique position. We've talked about this before, and that this is basically a contract year for him, in that the fourth and final season of his original contract that he signed prior to the 2020-2021 season isn't fully guaranteed. This is his last fully guaranteed season. And at some point, the Rockets are going to have to make a decision. Do we give him another contract? You typically don't see guys go into their lame duck year. Or worst case, they could pick up his option. But again, as we saw from the Mike D'Antoni years, that's not really par for the course in the NBA. That's not how these things typically work. So my guess is that the Rockets are going to make a decision one way or another. Do we offer him a second contract for multiple years moving forward? And so it's good for him to get some wins like this, because with a team as young as it is, sure, you want to see some wins on the floor, but those are hard to come by with the situation he inherited and how young the roster is right now. This is something where you can see in so many areas, again, KPJ's willingness to take the leap of faith on the organization in the first place and be willing to speak about the organization in the terms that he is, and do something that agents around the league were shocked by. I think that speaks to the culture that Steven Silas is buying into, that speaks to how focused he has this group buying in on his vision the culture that they've created. And that's sort of what you have to judge him by, because it's not really fair this year to judge him by wins and losses. Sure, you don't want him to be like 15-67 or anything crazy, but it's not a situation where you should say, well, if they're not in the play-in or pushing for it, then you should fire him. No. I mean, the roster is not of his control. But this is something that tells you that there's something special in the locker room, in the camaraderie, in the culture that they have created. And so it's a win for Steven. And I'm glad that he gets to enjoy that, because just given the circumstance of the job, he hasn't gotten to do that much the first 2 years. And I would even extend that analogy to the way we were talking earlier about KPJ being willing to buy in to the vision and trust that the Rockets have his best interest at heart. There's been a lot of talk on Rockets Twitter. This is a different discussion, but about the hypothetical that Jonathan Fagan threw out Sunday night about potentially starting Bruno Fernando over Alperen Sengun. Well, guess what? What if Alperen Sengun buys into that role? Because coming off the bench, even if he plays about the same overall minutes, coming off the bench, he gets more touches. The way to play that sort of goes to his skill set. I think eventually, yeah, you want him to get used to playing with KPJ and Jalen more. But what if by doing this, you're basically allowing Alperen to be happy and to grow in a positive state of mind, as opposed to sulking if things aren't going his way? I think you're constantly seeing Steven and Rafael in this development cycle prioritize positivity, getting these guys in the right frame of mind. It's important to their development. Again, it's too early to say the entire program is clearly a success. Time will tell on that. But I think it's pretty clear that a lot of these guys, starting with KPJ and Jalen, are definitely much better now than they were a year ago. And with that happening, I think you do have to give some big picture kudos to the system in place.
Yeah, it feels like there's certainly just, team-wide, organization-wide, a level of buy-in to the culture that is trying to be established, to the things that, Stephen Silas is trying to implement and put in place, the grand vision that Rafael Stone has. And when you can get that level of, again, trust is the key word that we keep circling back to here, that level of trust from one of your key guys, one of your, maybe arguably cornerstone type guys in Kevin Porter Jr. moving forward, it helps out a ton overall in the grand scheme of things. Last point that I want to bring up here, Ben, when we just kind of circling back to the actual framework of the deal, I think it is really important to note here that as far as the CBA implications, the salary cap implications for this deal moving forward, had the Rockets just held on to KPJ this season, had they not extended him and walked into next offseason, his cap hold would have been roughly about, I think we ballparked it about 10-ish million or so. And so the fact that his new cap hold, once the extension actually kicks in and his guaranteed dollar figure is going to be just south of 16 million, you look at that, and so basically he's going to have only a $6 million more cap hit than we were kind of originally expecting. Which means that in the grand scheme of things, this Rockets team is very much still in play for a couple big name free agents, being able to clear up at least enough space for one maximum slot next summer, possibly clearing, still north of, $65 million or so dollars to be able to, potentially sign two big name marquee free agents if two of those types of names should appear on the marketplace available. So, I mean, this move not only provides a lot of future long-term flexibility, it provides a level of security and safety for Kevin Porter Jr. now that he gets a certain amount of guaranteed money, more than he's accumulatively made in his NBA career to this point, quite a bit more than that actually. And not only all that, but it also still allows the Rockets the future cap flexibility to still be in play for a marquee free agent next summer.
Yeah, basically the only risk from the Rockets perspective is increasing that cap hold next summer. Basically, it would have been $10 million on your books to keep him basically as a restricted free agent and have the rights to, match any outside offer or then sign him on top of any free agents you sign. Whereas this way, I mean, it's a small price to pay, not even $6 million, but it protects you from the upside of what if he has a Jalen Brunson type breakout year and all of a sudden he's banging on the door for a much more lucrative financial package. That's what this deal really does. It's a very, very small trade-off in the grand scheme of things. And it also protects you from the standpoint of what if 2023 isn't the big year that you make your splash in free agency? Because you always have to work on sort of parallel paths. I mean, of course, the Rockets would love to get a star free agent next summer when they have max cap room. But if it doesn't work out, well, you might see them take on, a slightly negative contract for draft compensation and sort of roll it forward a year. Well, by doing that, you're keeping at that flat 15.9 base rate, you're keeping him in a fairly level ballpark, as opposed to if you have that $10 million cap hold, sure, it's a slightly lower figure for.
Oh, completely lost Ben there. Ton of fun, production value all over the place in the show. Looks like he's coming back in, though. We're going to patch this all together in post, and it's going to be fantastic. Ben was making a really quality point there, and he is working on getting it back together. So I'm gonna kind of hold things down while Ben is getting refinagled on his end because Zoom is being so unfavorable to him right now. No, but as far as, because I want Ben to be able to finish off his point before we wrap up the show. But I do think that one of the other factors that was kind of at play here, in KPJ ultimately deciding to sign this extension when he did, again, level of trust within the organization, absolutely, but probably also surveying the market a little bit and kind of surveying the NBA landscape, and probably had some conversations with his agents, his inner circle, and basically being like, hey, Houston is a great situation for him. He gets along well with all the players. He's bought in on the long-term vision for what they're trying to achieve here. And ultimately, it made a lot more sense for KPJ to just, rather than maybe seeing if the grass could be greener elsewhere and betting on himself for this upcoming season and testing the waters of restricted free agency next summer, it made a lot of sense for him to just, hey, this contract will pay me out and will be financially beneficial as long as I hold up my end of the bargain. So in a way, KPJ is kind of still betting on himself, but he's betting on himself with this current contract structure rather than waiting until next offseason to try and make things happen. I think Ben is reconnected now, so he should be able to finish off the excellent point that he was making there a moment ago.
Yeah, all I was saying, and apologies for the technical difficulties today, not sure what's going on, but the bottom line is it's a small price to pay the $6 million in 2023 to not only protect yourself from the Jalen Brunson scenario, but to also give you a friendlier cap figure in those future years. Because if KPJ, even if he doesn't take like a Brunson type leap, even if he's just simply on the floor and builds on what he did a year ago, then simply being another year removed from all the issues of his past in Cleveland, and of course, other teams being able to potentially offer him as a restricted free agent, that's going to put him in a much stronger leverage position. So I think the odds are pretty good that in a restricted free agency scenario, those future years, the base would be a lot more than 15.9 million, which is basically MLE level in the coming years with where the salary cap is going. So really the only year that there's a slight negative impact is 2023 to your cap figures, and you may not even use all of your salary cap room in 2023. That sort of depends on who's willing to say yes and what happens on the market. In future years, from 2024 onward, I think it's actually a better spot for the Rockets than if they had let him become a restricted free agent. So really, all it is just putting $6 million more on your books in a summer, not even 6 million, like 5.8, I think, in a summer where there were no guarantees that you were even going to spend all that money because you're positioned to potentially have still like 60 million plus. So it's a very small price to pay to insulate yourself from these Jalen Brunson type scenarios and to long-term set up your salary cap books heading into the middle part of this decade when you're trying to build a contender. It's just a very, very small price to pay for the greater certainty over the long haul.
Absolutely. And it bears worth repeating one more time. This was, I don't think there's a precedent for this type of rookie extension with so many non-guaranteed years, such a team-friendly contract structure, mainly because there's never been a situation that has necessitated this type of deal, at least not in recent memory, recent history. So again, hats off to Rafael Stone for coming up with such a creative framework for this deal, one that works for both sides, that KPJ can feel confident in moving forward. Calling Houston his home, says that he's here for a long time and he's ready to rock and roll. Called Houston his home. He's very bought in on the city, on the fan base, on the organization, and it looks like, at least for the time being, right, the organization has high hopes for him. They want to see him achieve at the highest level, and this deal will allow him to do that and hopefully take some of the pressure, some of the weight off of his shoulders in saying, hey, we trust you, we believe in you, go out there and prove it to us. But the money is there as long as you can hold up your end of the bargain. Ben, you know the drill. Go ahead and let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yeah. First off, apologies again for the technical difficulties. Beyond that, you can follow me on Twitter where there are less technical difficulties at Ben DuBose, also the Rockets Wire and rocketswire.usatoday.com for daily news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked on Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Remember, our question for the day: how do you feel about Kevin Porter Jr. and his new contract extension? Let us know in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.